The morning began in silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds waking to soft sunlight stretching across the sleepy neighborhood. A few hours earlier, the darkness of the night had concealed a horror no one was yet aware of. Angie Dodge was supposed to show up for her second day of work. She was punctual, reliable, meticulous, the kind of person who organized her life down to the hour. When her co-worker knocked on the apartment door and received no answer, something already felt wrong. The handle turned. The door, surprisingly, wasn't locked. A breeze from the hallway stirred the quiet air inside. Then a scream. The bedroom was a scene from Nightmare. 18-year-old Angie lay on the floor, her body twisted unnaturally, her throat deeply slashed. Her underwear had been cut away. The pool of blood beneath her was wide, already drying at the edges. The room smelled metallic and sharp. The walls, the bedspread, even her own hair. Everything had streaks of red. The violence was not only evident, but almost theatrical in its rage. Police and forensics teams arrived quickly, drawn not only by the severity of the crime, but by the unusual forensic potential. DNA evidence was abundant. Angie's apartment was combed over for hours. Investigators found semen inside her, blood that wasn't hers, a strand of hair clenched in her hand. There were fingerprints that didn't match anyone in the household. It was a textbook example of a solvable case, or so it seemed. Angie had just moved out on her own a few weeks before her murder. She was determined to live independently, to begin her adult life. Her excitement for the future was contagious. Friends described her as bright, intelligent, endlessly kind. She wrote poetry, volunteered at the local library, and had dreams of one day becoming a teacher. She wasn't involved in risky behavior. She didn't party. She didn't drink. She had no known enemies. So who would want her dead? And why with such brutal intimacy? Detectives began interviewing everyone who had seen Angie in the days before her death. Her social circle was small, making it easier to construct a timeline. One name kept coming up: Christopher Tapp, a friend of one of Angie's acquaintances. Tapp wasn't known for violence, but he had a reputation for getting into trouble, mostly petty theft and trespassing. He was 20, with no full-time job and little direction in life. The police asked him to come in. Tapp's first interview was casual, but when he fumbled basic questions about his whereabouts the night of the murder, suspicion mounted. Over the next few days, he was brought in again and again. Eventually, 6 long interrogation sessions followed, each more intense than the last. No lawyer was present. Tapp, nervous and eager to please, began to crack under pressure. Detectives told him he was lying. They said they had evidence, though they didn't. They implied he could face the death penalty. They promised leniency if he just admitted he was there. Gradually, Christopher began to say what they wanted to hear. First, he said he had witnessed the murder, then that he had held Angie down. Finally, under threat of never seeing his family again, he agreed that he had participated in the attack. His story shifted with each session. At times, he named accomplices who didn't exist. At others, he described details that contradicted physical evidence. He didn't know how many times Angie had been stabbed. He couldn't recall where the murder weapon was. And most crucially, his DNA didn't match the semen found in Angie's body. Still, the prosecution moved forward. In court, the confession tapes were shown to the jury. The inconsistencies were clear, but the power of a supposed admission of guilt weighed heavily. The prosecutor argued that Tapp had helped someone else, a second man who had raped and killed Angie. Though they had no idea who that man was, Tapp's presence, they insisted, was enough. The jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to 30 years to life, and so the case was declared solved. But Carol Dodge, Angie's mother, refused to believe it. She had sat through the trial, watched the tapes, heard her daughter's name spoken over and over in court, and none of it made sense to her. Christopher Tapp looked confused, broken. He didn't resemble the monster she imagined. More than that, his story didn't fit the evidence. She couldn't stop thinking, what if the real killer was still out there? Carol became a force of nature. She began requesting the case files, analyzing DNA reports, reaching out to experts. Her grief transformed into a relentless pursuit of truth. Over the years, she met with lawyers, scientists, reporters. She partnered with the Idaho Innocence Project. She spoke at conferences. She begged prosecutors to re-examine the evidence. In 2009, new DNA testing reaffirmed the same conclusion. The semen inside Angie belonged to someone else, not Christopher Tapp, but still no arrest. Carol pushed harder. By 2017, a groundswell of support and legal pressure led to a re-evaluation of Tapp's conviction. The state agreed his confession was unreliable. He was released after 20 years in prison. Though not officially exonerated, he was free, and Carol stood beside him. The case remained open. The real killer's DNA was still sitting in evidence. Then came a breakthrough. In 2018, detectives uploaded the unknown DNA profile into a public genetic genealogy database. It was a controversial method, but one that had recently led to the capture of the Golden State Killer. Through painstaking analysis, a familial connection was found. A distant cousin. With the help of genealogists, a family tree was built backward, then forward. All branches led to one name, Brian Lee Drips. Drips had lived across the street from Angie at the time of her murder. He had a criminal record and a history of drug abuse, but he had never been interviewed, never been a suspect. His name had never come up. Detectives followed him in 2019. They waited outside a store and collected a cigarette he threw on the ground. DNA testing confirmed it. He was the man they had been looking for. They brought him in. What followed was stunning. Drips confessed, calmly without much emotion. He said he had planned to rape Angie but hadn't intended to kill her. When she fought back, he panicked. He stabbed her repeatedly and fled. He had never told anyone. He had lived for 23 years with the secret. Drips was charged with first-degree murder and rape. In court, he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after 20 years. Carol Dodge was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She wept, not out of relief, but because the long road had come to an end. For her, justice was never about revenge. It was about the truth. Christopher Tapp was officially exonerated in 2019. His name cleared. He had lost 2 decades, but he walked free, thanks in no small part to the woman whose daughter's life he had been falsely accused of taking. The murder of Angie Dodge is now one of the most discussed wrongful conviction cases in modern U.S. history. It is taught in law schools and used in police training. It serves as a cautionary tale about the power of confessions, the fallibility of memory, and the devastating consequences of getting it wrong. In the end, it was DNA that caught the killer, but it was a mother's refusal to stop digging that made the system listen.